America's ammunition shelves looked downright normal last spring. 9mm boxes were stacked chest-high at big box stores, and even modest gun shops had pallets of .223 shrink-wrapped and waiting. The calm felt almost surreal to anyone who remembered the scramble of 2020, when panic buying and factory shutdowns left people paying $50 for range ammo that used to cost $13. But most shooters assumed the worst was behind us. Lost in that sense of relief was a corporate power play already in motion, one that shifted control of several 100 million cartridges a year to a boardroom 4,500 miles from the United States. In this video, we'll talk about how CSG took over the U.S. ammo market, why this puts your supply at risk, and how CBC, a Brazilian ammo powerhouse, just fired back with a fully integrated $300 million factory in Oklahoma. You'll see why this bold move might be our best shot at true ammo independence. In late November, while most Americans were still polishing off Thanksgiving leftovers, Vista signed an agreement selling every one of those brands to the Czechoslovak group. $2 billion changed hands, financed by one of Wall Street's biggest banks, and almost no one outside the industry noticed. On the surface, nothing appeared different. The head stamp on a federal 5.56 case still read FC, and green and yellow core-locked boxes still rolled off the Lenoke, Arkansas line. Yet control had moved offshore. CSG's chairman, 30-something industrialist Michael Sternad, built his empire buying decommissioned Soviet armor, refurbishing it, and selling it to any NATO ally willing to pay. He owns more tanks than the Czech and Slovak armies combined, sells artillery shells to Ukraine, and maintains global ambitions that dwarf the concerns of a weekend plinker in Kansas. To him, civilian cartridges are a revenue stream, not a cultural inheritance. It is impossible to ignore the leverage that move grants foreign decision-makers. A factory can stay in Arkansas, yet still end up working weekends for foreign policy objectives rather than domestic demand. During a future conflict, the European Union might pressure its companies to prioritize NATO contracts. A directorate could label certain civilian calibers non-essential and urge reduced output in the name of sustainability or social responsibility. CSG would not have to ban your ammunition outright. It could simply lengthen delivery windows, add compliance surcharges, or allocate production to allies first. Shelves empty just the same. Price follows supply, and consolidation amplifies price swings. With Federal, CCI, Remington, Speer, and Fiocchi resting beneath one umbrella, a coordinated 2% price increase becomes nearly invisible in isolation, yet painful in aggregate. Competing brands that remain domestically owned rely on many of the same raw material vendors. So when the new corporate parent bids up primer compound or brass strip, the ripple raises everybody's cost basis. Reloaders, once the safety valve for budget-minded shooters, face an even harsher squeeze because Alliant powder sits in the same family tree. If your entire hobby depends on components that pass through a single conglomerate's purchasing department, you don't really have independence. You have permission. Law enforcement is not insulated from that curve. Large metropolitan departments sign multi-year contracts, but rural sheriffs and smaller agencies often buy ammunition from the very distributors civilian shooters use. If a Czech board decides to redirect 9mm in response to a European military tender, the Baxter County Sheriff's Office in Arkansas might discover its next qualification order backordered 6 months. Politicians who already dislike civilian firearms ownership would seize on the resulting headlines, claiming that hoarders jeopardize public safety. They would miss, or deliberately ignore, the upstream choke point. Lake City Army ammunition plant's recent capacity cuts compound the threat. The Army demolished one of the 4 production halls in Missouri under the banner of modernizing for the new 6.8x51 cartridge. That modernization will not deliver additional capacity until at least 2026, leaving the plant producing half its prior output. Lake City historically spilled surplus 5.56 and 7.62 into the civilian market. With that spigot partially closed and a foreign conglomerate steering the biggest commercial brands, any new panic could eclipse the shortages of the pandemic era. If that were the whole story, the outlook would feel grim indeed. Yet adversity sometimes invites unexpected allies. Enter Companhia Brasileira de Cartuchos, CBC Global Ammunition. The Brazilian manufacturer, long known to American shooters through Magtech pistol cartridges and men contract surplus, quietly announced a different kind of move. Not a takeover, but a brand new factory on U.S. soil. CBC USA will rise on Oklahoma dirt, a $300 million bet that American shooters still deserve a homegrown source of primers, powder, brass, and bullets. Before Vista set the sale in motion, it rebranded its ammunition arm with investor decks brimming with jargon about unlocking shareholder value. That change isolated liabilities and assets, so a foreign buyer could swallow only the parts it wanted. Pension obligations stayed on Vista's original books, while the tooling, patents, and massive distributor network were bundled into a bow. Wall Street applauded, but nobody asked what happens when the next surge in demand collides with foreign boardroom priorities. The mechanics of that sale reveal how opaque the process has become. Behind closed doors, Vista's attorneys petitioned the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, insisting there was no national security concern because the output served civilians. That framing ignored the simple fact that a .223 soft point used to cull coyotes represents an instant reserve of marksmanship training ammo should the National Guard need it. CFIUS nodded its approval anyway, and consumers learned of the decision only through a terse press release. Even the financing carried fingerprints of global leverage. J.P. Morgan Chase structured debt tranches tied to sustainable finance metrics. If CSG hits certain environmental goals, its interest rate drops. An easy path to those goals is curtailing lead-based bullet production or mothballing high-volume handgun lines. The borrower wins, the bank wins, and the American sport shooter loses. No legislation required. Contrast that incentive scheme with the revenue model CBC has laid out. The Oklahoma plant plans to run high volume across bread-and-butter calibers, 9mm, .223, 7.62 by 51, and 50 BMG. Margins stay thin by design, padded by savings from making primers and powder internally. Idle presses burn cash, so CBC's self-interest aligns with keeping shelves full all year. Shareholders at CBC earn money only when ammunition ships in truckloads, not when a press line sits silent to satisfy an ESG checkbox. There's also cultural momentum behind CBC's move. Brazil's shooting community exploded after that nation relaxed ownership restrictions, and CBC sponsored IPSC matches and practical shooting leagues to feed that demand. Many of its engineers compete on weekends, and they judge reputation by reliability on the firing line, not by boardroom presentations. That mindset travels with the management team spearheading the Oklahoma build. They have already been spotted at local IDPA matches, asking competitors what annoys them most about current factory loads. That kind of curiosity rarely survives in firms driven solely by quarterly earnings calls. CBC chose Oklahoma because the state welcomes firearms industry jobs, offers central logistics routes, and imposes no coastal red tape gauntlet. More important than geography, however, is the company's model. Instead of relying on third-party primer firms or imported powder, the new plant will make every critical component in-house. Vertical integration in ammunition is rare. Most brands purchase primer cups from one supplier, assembled anvils from another, powder from a chemical giant, and stamped brass from yet another source. Each link is a potential choke point. CBC intends to own the entire chain under a single roof. In practical terms, imagine cotton waste arriving by rail, nitrated in stainless reactors, washed, stabilized, and blended into custom burn rate powders without ever leaving the property. Brass strip from an Illinois mill feeds progressive presses that cup, draw, and trim cases in a seamless sequence. Vision sensors ejecting any piece even slightly off spec. Bullets form on transfer presses mere yards away, and finished cartridges roll straight into climate-controlled bunkers for aging tests before palletization. The fewer miles components travel, the more resilient the supply becomes. Some skeptics point out that CBC, like CSG, is foreign-owned. Nationality matters, but structure matters more. CBC is not ripping a profitable factory out of the U.S. and relocating it to São Paulo. It is building capacity here because demand here justifies the investment. That decision chains corporate success to the satisfaction of American shooters, not to the margins of an Italian luxury shotgun line or a Czech truck division. Plenty of international firms respect the U.S. market. Look at Toyota in Kentucky or Honda in Ohio. Those plants succeed because they anchor themselves to American workers, American suppliers, and American consumers. CBC intends the same. Employment numbers tell part of the tale. 350 skilled positions, engineers, machinists, chemists, will clock in under the CBC banner once the doors open. Those paychecks stay in the local economy, and the knowledge they cultivate does too. In a decade, some of those machinists will launch spin-offs or start companies that supply tooling and gauges to smaller ammo startups. Capacity breeds capacity, and talent tends to stay where opportunity exists. The timing could hardly be more pointed. As Vista's board toasted its multi-billion-dollar windfall, CBC executives were walking Oklahoma acreage and mapping utility corridors. By the time federal and Remington employees received new ID badges sporting a Czech corporate logo, CBC had filed environmental assessments for on-site primer chemistry benches. Where some see cash by flipping heritage brands, others see long-term profit in producing more cartridges close to the customer. Vertical integration also shields against stealth regulatory tactics. When agencies want to pinch supply without passing laws, they target components instead of loaded ammo. They can reclassify lead styphnate, tighten hazmat rules, or add paperwork to imported nitrocellulose. A facility that synthesizes its own priming compound and propellant dodges those snares. Should regulators squeeze import permits, CBC simply adjusts production schedules and keeps presses running. There is, of course, no guarantee that CBC will always place civilian needs first. The company supplies NATO allies and police agencies worldwide. The safeguard is alignment of incentives. CBC's defense contracts depend on goodwill in Washington, and nothing earns goodwill like creating manufacturing jobs in a state whose congressional delegation sits on key committees. Turning off the spigot to the very voters who made those jobs possible would be spectacularly short-sighted. Another advantage hides in plain sight: supply chain simplicity. Domestic lead smelters have dwindled under environmental rules, but scrap lead from battery recyclers still flows freely in the Midwest. Oklahoma lies a day's drive from Missouri's mining belt and Texas refineries that produce copper and zinc for gilding metal. Rail spurs running through Tulsa and Oklahoma City tie directly into national freight corridors. The fewer miles raw materials travel, the less expensive each cartridge becomes. The power to control nitrocellulose production on-site changes the equation. During the pandemic, that single chemical limited global ammunition output more than brass or bullets. Most nitrocellulose plants sit in Europe or Asia. Shipping disruptions or political edicts can bottleneck the substance overnight. CBC's decision to polymerize cotton linters into gun cotton under its own roof gives the Oklahoma plant a throttle mainstream competitors lack. If CSG instructs its Idaho rimfire line to idle because powder shipments slowed, CBC can pick up the slack. Shooters who remember the last crunch should pay attention to structural defenses instead of brand nostalgia. A cartridge stamped MagTech and made in Oklahoma with American brass is functionally the same as one stamped Federal made in Idaho. Price, availability, and reliability trump marquee lettering once the firing pin drops. Tradition has emotional pull, yet a living tradition adapts rather than ossifies. The lesson of recent shortages was not merely that demand can spike, it was that production overseas cannot flex fast enough. Even with U.S. factories running triple shifts, imported primers sat on cargo ships idling outside Los Angeles. Decision-makers in Europe had their own crises and were in no hurry to feed America's sporting habits. Any model promising genuine independence must shorten supply lines to a day's drive and a handshake. Some gunners worry that backing CBC sends money to a Brazilian parent firm instead of a local cooperative. That critique would sting harder if domestically owned behemoths had not sold out to foreign interests themselves. The question shifts from pure nationality to trustworthiness, capacity, and aligned incentives. CBC's investment indicates it values the American shooting community enough to pour concrete and install presses rather than gamble on currency arbitrage. What does this sea change suggest for personal planning? First, panic remains counterproductive. Hoarding a decade's supply drains wallets and deprives newcomers of affordable practice ammo. Better to establish a rolling reserve covering about 6 months of normal use, rotated by date to stay fresh. Second, diversification offers insurance. If 9mm vanishes, owning a .38 special revolver or .300 blackout carbine could keep range skills sharp. Third, watch the barcodes. When CBC USA cartridges hit shelves, retailers will mark them as Oklahoma-made. Choosing those boxes over imports when prices align encourages the capacity shooters claim they desire. The free market only rewards behaviors buyers reinforce. Fourth, stay engaged on policy. Congress rarely resists the temptation to meddle with ammunition through environmental or financial angles. A line buried in an appropriations bill can torpedo lead projectiles or raise excise taxes that only giants can afford. Local ranges and gun clubs serve as early warning radar. When you hear of new regulations targeting components, let representatives know the issue won't go unnoticed. Fifth, invest time and money in reloading. A single-stage reloading press costs less than 2 bulk cases of pistol ammo and pays dividends whenever shelves thin. You need not become a bench rest wizard, but understanding how primers, seat, and powder meters fosters independence. When CBC and CSG inevitably roll out flashy hypervelocity offerings, a practiced handloader can replicate proven loads for pennies on the dollar without waiting for back orders. But what do you think? Will CBC keep its promise to American shooters, or is this just round one? Let us know in the comments. Hit like, share this with your range crew, and subscribe for more hard truths on the 2A industry. Don't forget to ring the bell for more.